All right. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the E4 Youth Virtual Talk Series. My name is Jaleisha, and I am your host for today. I am a digital docent with E4 Youth, and I'm as well as a fourth year double major in journalism and communications and leadership here at UT. And today, our guest speaker will be Dr. Harold Hardaway. So, Dr. Harold Hardaway is a speaker and thought leader on corporate communications and culture. He believes that everyone should chase the good and centers his work on helping organizations create spaces where that is possible. Today, he serves as the co founder and CEO of Cardigan, an internal communications and employer branding firm, and he has previously been the director of corporate communications and culture for HEB. Harold has been featured in the San Antonio Magazine and Business.com, and his writings have been featured in the Austin Business Journal, SHRM's People Strategy blog, and Recruiter.com. He has recently been recognized as a finalist for the 2019 Austin Under 40 Awards, and he's on the board of directors for Leadership Austin, Creative Action, and Equality Texas. So please welcome to the stage Dr. Harold.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, welcome back.
Thank you for having me.
How's your day going?
Oh, so far so good. Just like work, keep it moving. Zoom calls, but for sure this is the highlight of my day. So,
yeah. Well, I'm glad we can bring some positivity your way. And so just to start off, can you explain to us, like, what do you do?
I know that's like the question my mother still asks me. What is it you do? Like, what do you do for a living? So Cardigan, like you already said, internal communications and employer branding. Think about that as a lot of things that are focused on the employee and the employee experience. Mm-hmm. So whether, and kind of we follow the employee life cycle, you could say. So we would do employer branding. So if you think about careers websites, so when you're looking for jobs or internships, you go to careers dot whatever the company name is .com. Mm-hmm. Right? Mm-hmm. And they're telling you about why they're a great place to work, all the different programs they have, what the internship is like. So we would help come up with the messaging and the content, even help people build the websites, right? We do onboarding. So once you get the employee in the door or the intern in the door, then how do you help them understand the culture and how they can best shine and thrive within an organization's culture, all the way through surveying and other things, health and wellness, culture of health and wellness. And then we haven't gone to like the exit component yet, but in my previous roles, we did things like that. So we do video production, we do writing, we do benefits communications for organizations. So, but it's all focused on the employee. And we do, honestly, that's our sweet spot, but we have done some company branding. So logos, research, a lot of communications research for organizations. So we do all that stuff, but our sweet spot, and I think we're probably going to chat about that a little bit later, is around employer branding and culture.
Okay. Yeah, I honestly didn't really know that was a job until I got to college. So I was like, dang, people really just sit there and tell other people how to do stuff? Like, that's your job, basically. I mean, I don't know, and research too.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of fun. And to be honest, I probably didn't necessarily know it was a job either. I sort of found my way to it. It's nothing I ever went to school for. But, it's kind of that overlap of what I'm good at and kind of what people come to me for. I think I'm hopping ahead, so I'm going to pause.
You're good. I mean, but yeah, okay. But I also seen that you work at Texas State. So I just want to know like a little bit about that or like what you taught.
Yeah, I actually was an adjunct faculty member there over the summer. I didn't teach this semester. And previously I taught at Incarnate Word, which is where I went to grad school for about 6 years. So taught organizational behavior and also research and assessment. So org behavior is all the things that you can actually put names to that you didn't know, like everything that you see happening around you. Has a term for it, someone's researched it, and you're like, oh, that's what that's called. right?
Okay.
Culture, climate, all these other things, but it's about management techniques, for organizations. So, which is a lot of fun and a lot of the work, I do. So even around motivation, right? Different ways to motivate people, and strategies and frameworks that individuals or leaders can use to motivate people on their teams. So I taught a lot of that, and I went to school for that. So teaching is a great outlet because there's so much energy on campus, fun, and it forces me to kind of keep myself sharp on what's new and what's next. And it's always just fun to be around young people. So,
why do teachers always want that? Like, they want to know, like, what are like the new hip words, like what is the point in y'all keeping up with that? Because I feel like in your own personal circles, like, you won't be saying these things. Like, if I say T in class, you're not going to walk up to your friend and be like, oh, T, like, because they're not going to know what you're saying.
I mean, they might. Part of it for me, usually, is music. So I was already Shazamming the music that was playing up ahead. But when I mention that, I mean staying on top of what's new and next, even in terms of what I'm supposed to be an expert at, right? So in order for me to teach someone something, I need to know it myself. And so before I teach any class, I'm always kind of thinking, well, what's different? What's changed in the world? What new research is out there? What have I seen other people, in my industry doing? And so even sometimes the questions that the student asks, I'd have to be like, I actually don't know. I need to go look that up. And I'm fine saying I don't know something, right? Because it forces me to learn something and kind of bring it back and incorporate it into the class. So I think there's I keep up to date professionally, right? Because I have to kind of stay ahead of the students, hopefully. And then just, like I said, it's always fun to hear what people are listening to or words kids say. I mean, I honestly will sit there with a pencil and like write things down and go look it up on Urban Dictionary later. I'm like, did they offend me or did they not? I have no idea. So I need to go look it up.
Yikes, a legend, I guess. Okay, but back to the topic. I mean, so like, what type of issues do companies really have that y'all work on?
Yeah, so to be funny, I mean, usually the issues that company has, and anyone in a creative space will probably tell you, is their request usually doesn't match their budget. But for us, what they're trying to figure out from an employer branding space is, what can I uniquely say that no one else can say? Right? So meaning from an employer standpoint, if everyone got paid the same dollar amount and all the benefits are the same, why would someone want to come work for my company versus working for another company? And so we help organizations figure that out. So a lot of times, leaders in organizations know what they want, but they don't know how to get there. And so we solve for how. So that's typically the biggest problem that they have. And then again, once they get people in the door with onboarding, how do you make the company or the organization sticky, right? And by that, you just imagine your feet getting stuck, like you don't want to leave, right? So how can we create an experience when someone gets there that makes them think, yes, I made the right decision? And part of that is being really honest in the employer branding side and saying who you are, what you do, what you stand for. So then, people who are coming in for internships or new students could say, I think this is the right fit. And when I get there, what you told me matches my experience, right? And so that's the problem that we typically solve for people and kind of make sure we have some harmony between those two.
Right. So what kind of questions do you ask teams to sort of understand their culture? What do those questions sort of tell you about them?
Yeah, so without giving too much away, but one of the first things that we love to ask people is we go around the room and we say, tell me when you were most proud to say you worked for this company, right? And so we will ask all kinds of people, not just leaders. Usually, like, we'll talk to the leaders, which is great because that founder experience is really important. But it's also to long-term employees. So if someone's worked there for 10 years, it's like, why have you stayed? Because that really illuminates something as well. And then the other question sometimes that we'll ask people would be, if I would have known this about the company, I would have come to work here a long time ago. The other question that we would ask is, if you've been here for a while, when was the moment that you knew this company was the right place for you? Or if they're a new employee, that you made the right decision? And then tell me a story, right? So we're always looking for people to tell me a story. Don't give me the short answer. Like, tell me the whole story about what happened, because in there you'll start to see nuggets. And we look for the through line. What is the thing that every single person is saying, no matter what their role is, no matter where they are in the organization? So those are some of the questions that we ask to get to kind of an emotion, that people have, and then the story, and we can kind of pull out themes from there to figure out what's important to the people who work there.
Okay, and that, me being Black, what do you, it makes me think about, like, what do you do, like, whenever you're, like, working through, like, a company's culture and there's an underlying theme of complacent racism and the foundation of how the company works?
Yeah, I would say, fortunately enough, I haven't run into that a lot, right, in my career. And part of it probably figures they wouldn't hire me if that's actually a problem. But a lot of times when that does happen, sometimes it'll kind of come up in conversation. You can kind of get these undertones, and then it's kind of talking with the customer, because it tends to sometimes not be an overall pervasive issue. There tends to maybe be pockets of it. And sometimes it's a leader situation. But anytime we approach DEI conversations, it's about the leader and top leadership taking a stance, right?
What is DEI?
Oh, sorry, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Okay.
So some people say D&I, diversity and inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is kind of like the new way people are talking about it. So again, the first thing is, like, leaders need to take a stand, and you can take that on your individual teams. You can take that within your work group, and from a company and an organizational standpoint. After that, there is an education that needs to happen, because everyone is in a different place in terms of what diversity is, and specifically what inclusion is and what it is not and what it feels like, right? Because you have diversity is like a numbers game. Inclusion is, do I feel like I belong? Can I be my authentic self in this space? And educating people on what that looks like, the good and the bad, and understanding where they are is really important. And one of the things that we love to do at Cardigan is around research, right? And kind of just asking questions to really understand the root, the source of the problem, what we say, what good looks like, and bubbling those up, prototyping, testing, and they're HR issues. They're all kind of issues that you could take a look at, but in creating, a more inclusive environment, that's typically how we would go about it. But you have to have the leadership bought and on board. Otherwise you're kind of your wills. So it's one of those situations where if they just want to do training only, sometimes we don't want those projects, because that's kind of a checkbox situation, and you're not actually addressing the issue and solving the problem. So, and that's where we, like to challenge folks and say, well, what are you trying to do? Is this compliance-based, or are we actually looking at making meaningful and sustainable change to become a more inclusive organization?
Well, right. So then that goes into, like, how do we as students sort of look for certain aspects in companies that we're trying to get hired at? So, like, what do we look for?
Yeah. Number one, I think, employee resource groups. What does that look like? Meaning, do they have like an LGBT group? Is there, a women's group? And are they supported by the company? Also, mentorship programs are really important as well, to get underrepresented groups chances and opportunities. Because a lot of organizations can, in the last, 3 months, I don't know how many people have put out stances or positions in terms of being anti-racist, in terms of being inclusive. I think one of the best resources that you probably have would be people that that work there, right? And ask them what it's really like, and ask them about their experience, because websites can be beautiful, awards can be won, but when you get there, do you feel like you have to code switch? of, or can you be exactly who you are? Do you feel like you have to dress a certain way or say something specific? Do you feel like your opinion is valued and heard? So some of the questions you could even ask would be, hey, how does the organization, support leaders and individuals in their journey to being more inclusive? You can ask.
Can you explain what code switching is real quick?
Huh?
Can you explain what code switching is real quick?
Oh, code switching. Yeah. So regardless, right, whether you are Asian, Black, Hispanic, anything, so the way you talk to your Black friends may not necessarily be the way you speak when you are at work. There was a really funny video I saw the other day about like code switching at work, but if you think about it, when you're around your family or people who look like you, or even if you're in the LGBT community, right? So the way you hang out with your LGBTQ friends versus, if you're family members who are all the same, you may say or talk differently. You may choose to dress differently. So, like my last employer, I wore a hoodie, jeans, and t-shirts to work. And I felt like it was perfectly fine for me to be able to do that because that's how I was comfortable. As gay as I am now, I was just as gay in the office. I try not to be offensively gay or anything, but I was me, right? I show up, I'm me. This is kind of, what you get. So are people allowed to do that in those spaces? An indirect way. So that's what code switching is, right? So changing the way you talk, changing the way you speak, changing the way you dress to kind of fit in. And another way of saying that is like assimilation. Right. So to do well here, I need to assimilate. That's not inclusion. So, yeah, I answered that question, right? Yeah.
Yes, you ain't never lie.
Did I answer that?
Yeah.
Now I even forgot the question I was answering initially. So what was that again?
The question we were answering initially is like, what do students look for in companies that they're getting hired at?
Yeah. And so, I would ask the manager directly, like, hey, how is inclusion important, to you? How do you support that, within your teams, right? Because what you'll realize will make the biggest difference, even if the organization is awesome at something at the organizational level, or not good at something, your direct manager will make the biggest difference in your experience, right? Overall. So they always say people leave managers, they don't necessarily always leave companies. So asking how they operationalize that or make that real is important. Another way is, what does the ideation process look like? So how do we get ideas? How do they bubble up throughout the organization? When's the last time someone, on your team who was not a manager, came up with a great idea that you implemented? Is kind of another way as well.
So we would probably ask these questions like during the interview, right?
During the interview process, you could also even ask, like I said, your friends, like, or someone that that works there. To me, that's usually always the best way, because when you're interviewing, just like you're putting your best foot forward, usually the company is putting their best foot forward as well. But someone who's been in that environment, you can also, even when you walk in for your interview, just look around. How are people dressed? How are they interacting with each other? How is the environment laid out? Are people calling each other by their first name? Are people smiling and laughing? Are heads down? You know what I mean? That tells you a lot, just because when it comes to brand, we always say there's what you see, there's what you hear, and what you say, right? But then there's also that experience component that kind of puts the full story together. And so I would kind of take a look at all of those components, but I would be more likely to rely on the words of someone who works there, who I know well, than probably what someone told me in an interview.
Right. So what would be an example of how a company can build culture that is actually inclusive to all people of color without just saying it, but showing it in their actions as well?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing, honestly, is if you have the declaration, it's talking about how to operationalize it and reinforcing it, right? So what gets measured gets changed, gets focused, gets attention. Because a lot of times you can have all of these goals, but if it doesn't, I don't want to say come at a cost, right? But if the organization trains and supports managers on how to do that, so you can talk inclusion, You can talk diversity, but if it's like this CBT that you take once a year as a checkbox exercise, that's a little less than ideal. So I think number one, the main point is education, and then challenging leaders on how to operationalize it. And not just from a manager standpoint, but also there are a lot of things that individual contributors can do to lead to inclusion. So role modeling, celebrating that, rewarding and recognizing that. So whether that's company awards, team awards, different things, and highlighting people who do it well, and making sure that managers walk the walk, talk the talk, and holding their feet to the fire when they don't, right? So measuring it on organizational surveys, digging in if the numbers don't look right, having feedback loops for individual contributors to give, feedback on their manager or when they feel like something has not been inclusive is also really important. So those are real easy, simple things that an organization can do beyond just making a statement.
Period.
Yeah.
And so what is your opinion on companies' plans on like getting back to working in person during COVID-19? And I've seen an article about it on your website as well, but I thought it'd be helpful to talk about in this space too.
Yeah, we've had a lot of conversations with companies about this, and they were like, how do we, measure productivity and so I asked them when I was like, well, how did you measure productivity when they were in the office? It's the same way. So a lot of leaders are concerned about measuring productivity, but if you think about it, because I'm sitting at my desk for 8 hours doesn't necessarily mean I've been productive, right? And if an individual let's be honest, there have been days, I'm sure we've all shown up to work or somewhere and we're like, we phoned it in because we were just having a bad day. So it's sort of redefining what productivity looks like, what management looks like. Specifically in returning to the office, what I always say is be really flexible, right? Because everyone says, oh, well, we were just learning to work from home. No, we were working from home during a pandemic, and our kids were at home that we were trying to homeschool if people had kids, and so the big thing for me is flexibility, because even for some adults and for some children, home isn't always a safe place. And so going into the office may be good for people to get out of the home environment. Also, if anyone does have children, a lot of times, and even for the folks on the call, right, is school going to be in person? Is school going to be online or not? So having that level of flexibility, I think, is important. And it shows the individual, that you trust them. And we've been doing it for the last 4 months, and research shows that productivity has actually increased in a lot of spaces. So that's my opinion. Be flexible, meet people where they are, and that flexibility shows trust. And trust is foundational to so many things that you want to do in your organization.
Mm-hmm. And what are some signs for us as students that a company really cares about your health and well-being?
Yeah. Oh gosh. Well, number one would be, programs that they have in place to support you. So most companies would have, ERP programs, employee resource programs. And that could be mental health or anything, but I would say how many of them are there and how often do they promote them, right? So when it does come to health and wellness, what does that look like? What does the vacation policy look like? A lot of organizations have sabbaticals, right? And I think this resource group and resource program.
What's a sabbatical?
Oh, a sabbatical. If you've worked for an organization for a certain period of time, sometimes it's like 3 years. Some organizations it's 15, but you can take 6 weeks off. Some organizations pay you for it, some don't necessarily. But so do you have flexible work hours? And is that policy written down? Is it company-wide, or is that something that is team specific? Right? Because sometimes if you're working in a call center or something like that, you may need to physically be there. Or if you have a job that is more specialized or like a trade labor, well, then you physically have to be there, right? But are there flexible hours, flexible schedules? What does vacation policy look like? What are all the programs they have in place to support you from a health and wellness perspective? Mental health, how easily do they make those available for you? To me, those things are important, because it's not always necessarily about, bean bags and candy and bringing your dog to work. Don't get me wrong. If I had a dog, I would love to bring my dog to work. But, you know, all the other things are really important for you as a person as well.
Right. So now that we've talked about like what do you look for in different companies you're looking at, many students here are going into the creative field, and a lot of things that you have to work on when you're going into the creative field of like is your personal branding. So do you have any advice on how students can work on their personal branding when looking for jobs, or even what type of questions should they ask themselves about how they want to build their brand?
Yeah. So what I always tell people, and we actually teach this, we're like, it's just like with companies. So pick 3 words, right? And so anytime someone meets you or works with you, when you leave the room, how do you want them to describe you, right? So they would say, oh, that Harold, he's blank, blank, and blank. Well, what are those 3 words? Because people can probably think of some words to describe me, but they may not be the words that I want them to use, right? And that's really important. And so when I would speak to interns in college, you know, new college graduates, the one piece of advice I would always give them is be useful. And funny story, someone came up to me and they were like, yeah, one of my interns, you know, said you told them to be useful. And I was like, wait, did they tell the rest of the story? You know, because that sounds bad by itself. But a lot of times, you know, when you come out of college, you are on fire and you want to change the world, right? And you want to get noticed. But usually you can probably do that just by being useful. So basically what that means is, where is the need in this organization that I just got into? You know what I mean? How can I help advance the organization's mission? And you learn so much in that space, and that will actually help you get noticed, right? It's just by being useful. I feel like I've almost built a career on being useful and figuring out how I can fit in. I've learned so much by being useful, because in my experience, a lot of folks be like, I want to work on strategy. And I'm like, well, we all work on strategy, and kind of being very specific about, you know, what that is. But I think if you just think about where's the need and how can I be useful? How can I build my skills? That is what's really, to me, the most important. From a creative space, I think the hardest thing, and this is Harold's opinion, from creatives to get and understand is sometimes it's easy for people to be in love with their own ideas or their own design or whatever, but we have a client that we are trying to service. And sometimes we have to be flexible, right? So be useful, but be flexible. And what I mean by that is, yeah, maybe we have to change the color because they want it purple and not green, right? Or maybe there's all this other stuff that we have to be flexible on. And yes, maybe we want a different edit, or maybe we want this or that. But that doesn't mean you did a bad job. And so even when we're looking to bring in additional help on the creative side, to me, that's one thing that really stands out is like, well, how flexible are they to making changes based on what the customer request or need is? So yes, we know that whatever we came up with, you know, was probably like the best solution, but at the end of the day, the best solution is the one that makes the client happy, yet still gets the outcomes that they want. And so from a creative standpoint, you know, for anyone, be useful. And by the way, be useful isn't just for people coming out of school. So my team would put on events and I would be there. I would pick up trash bags and pick up trash and help do other things because they didn't want me in their way or in their space. But that's something I could do to be useful in that moment.
Right. Okay. And what do you think is the best way to sort of sell yourself with companies when you're telling your story, especially when I feel like a lot of creatives are well-versed in many different things in the creative industry. You know, like they may like do video editing and like graphic design. So like, what's like the best way to sell yourself without seeming like you're everywhere? You know what I mean?
Yeah. So there's like a depth and breadth kind of conversation, right? So like you might be really, really good at one thing, and then there's sort of like the breadth of things that you know a little bit about. When I think about this, what I always say, there are things that I know or believe that I am good at, And we even took a look at this from a company perspective, a few years ago. But what is it that you say you do and that you're really good at? And then kind of look at what is everyone around me coming to me for, whether you're working on group projects, classmates, what are they asking you for help with? If you are an intern, what are people coming to you for, right? So the intersection between what you say you do and then what people come to you for is probably your sweet spot, right? And that might be something that other people really can't say that they're good at. It also matches where what you do matches a need, right? So kind of branding yourself in that space, and then kind of sticking to it and digging deeper into it. So we talk about employer branding on our website. That's a lot of the work that we get. But then we also have all this other stuff, right? But if you say you do too many things, people do get confused. So the intersection between what do people come to you for and what do you love to do and what are you good at is a sweet spot, because you're solving a problem that they have, but it's also something you love doing. So I would brand yourself kind of in that space.
Right. And also when I read your bio, you said something about chasing the good and you help other companies do that. What does that mean?
So long story short, chasing the good is being an active participant and bringing in the things to your life that, make you happy, that bring joy. And kind of where it came from is, being a young person at one point in my life, you would chase SAT scores, ACT scores, if they still have those, I think they do. You chase getting into the right schools, you chase internships. When you get the job, you chase the job, then you chase the promotion, right? And we work really, really, really hard to do those things. And we will push other things to the side to reach those goals, right? And my thing was, do we work that hard to bring goodness into our lives? Do we work that hard to really be happy, right? And so I kind of went through a phase in life where I lost a lot of things and people in a short period of time. So like my puppy, one of my best friends passed away at a very young age, like 33, all this other stuff. And then I was like, what am I doing with my life? And so I started living like I was basically going to die in a year. What are all the things I wanted to do? And I was like, why can't I feel this way all the time? And so sometimes when you get really focused, you put blinders on. And so chasing the good, for me, chase means being an active participant, right? Goodness are the things that make memories. Because the way I think about things is this really going to matter on my deathbed? Yeah. Probably not. If I do something, okay, well, if it will matter, then that's something I need to do. So for me, it's a reminder that if I have a choice between work or something that's going to make a memory, go with goodness, right? So chase the good, right? Focus on goodness, being clear about what those things are, and pursue them. So an example of this would be if you worked on a class project, or for those you all who are in internships, and you did something and it worked out really well. The next time your boss or the teacher asks you to do a similar project, you'd be like, ooh, last time I did this and they really liked it, right? So the second time you're like, I'm gonna do it again. You make it a best practice, right? But when it comes to being happy, if you had a really good day, you're like, wow, today was a good day. How often do we as people stop and we're like, well, what did I do? Right? What did I do differently that made today a good day? And do I actively make that a best practice? Do I incorporate that into my life moving forward? So, make joy, make memories, make happiness a best practice in your life. And so for me, that's helping organizations, be honest about who they are, because that means people, when they choose to work in those organizations, this is a place where I can be me because they were honest about who they are. I know who I am, and that's a match. When I get there, and we're creating onboarding programs and we're working on culture, it's kind of one of those situations where, wow, if we can make this a supportive, inclusive environment, then people can chase the good at work. We have health and wellness programs, whether it's you want to exercise, mental health, eat right, whatever. So health and wellness and culture all feeds in together. And so we really focus on trying to have people make really good matches and then create great experiences when they're there so they can, sort of self-actualize, live their best life, if you will, in the organization. So that's how I chase the good at work.
Okay. Wow. I don't know. I've never thought about it like that. I mean, so when you're thinking about that, how do you, recommend handling like your work-life balance, or what does it come to?
And I would say just also like flexibility. Like this is different for every single person, right? And a lot of times, bringing your full self to work is important, and thinking about the person, as their whole selves and all the different roles that people play in their life. You may be a daughter, you may be a mother, you may be a brother or a sister. You know what I mean? Like all these things kind of play into that. So for me, I always say it just depends on who you are and what you like. An example of this is my business partner, Shannon. Love her. She's great. But we're very different in terms of work-life balance, right? So for her, she loves to work out in the morning. Her calendar's blocked until 9:30. And she's like, yep, don't take this space, right? This is me. This is my time. This is what I'm going to do. I don't have a problem getting interrupted all day or potentially working on the weekends. But if I want to leave and travel and go do something, I'll do that. I've been on vacation and I've kind of taken calls. But for me, I kind of like to wander and kind of do what I want to do. And I'm happy with what my a friend of mine, Kane, calls work-life integration. So I'm happy to kind of integrate it where I want work to be, right? As long as it's flexible for me to choose where I work. And I think that's actually what we're seeing even now with COVID, right? Work-life balance tends to be an integration, and people are integrating work where it makes the most sense during the day. Because sometimes you do have meetings that you may have to go into, but we're not going into an office. We're not being measured based on, our butts in the seats. You know what I mean? We are being measured on output and productivity. And some people might be really productive at night. Usually for me, 10 o'clock, all of a sudden my brain turns on and I have like the best ideas and I'm going. But try to get me to do anything before 10 and it's not going to happen. So I really prefer work-life integration, but I think everyone's different. Everyone has different responsibilities. So setting boundaries and just kind of asking for what you need is the way to do that, right? Because I'm sure the way you like work-life balance is probably very different from me.
Yeah, I got work, life, and school.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. I think that's like really good that you said that, because one of the managers at E4, he says that all the time. He's just like, hey, like, when are like you most productive, and like do work like during that time. And I feel like we don't ever like listen to him, but I feel like you just said it and it's like, dang, now it sort of makes sense now that somebody else has said it. Cause he's like, oh, just like work, like, whenever you think you have time. If you know you're gonna get up at 8 in the morning and you're not gonna be productive and you're just gonna be sleepy and you're just gonna lolly around, like, don't do it. Like, wake up at 1 in the afternoon like you want to and get done what you want to get done whenever you wake up. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And it does work out, really well like that, because you can knock out, it's so fast. And they kind of talk about being kind of in like a flow or the zone, but when your brain's firing on all cylinders. And sometimes I'm sure people, the experienced professionals on the line right now, some of the students on the line, you kind of know, like, you could sit at your desk or wherever from like 8 to 2, and then all of a sudden you get all your work done between like 2 and 5. Right? I mean, that happens to so many people, often because, well, where's your sweet spot? So even from a branding standpoint, also from a work-life balance and working standpoint, right? Find the sweet spot.
Right. And I also just want to give way for people to ask questions during this time. So if you have any questions, throw them in the chat and I will answer them as they come. And while we wait on you guys to answer some questions, I have one more. Well, not one more, but I have another question. And so talking about all these things, how do people, or what do you think is the best way to set your priorities? You know what I mean? Because you were like, oh, like we have to like chase the good or whatever. And so it's just like, dang, like, do I like, do I prioritize like making sure that my career is going upward first, or, do I prioritize finishing school, stuff like that?
It's really interesting. So when I think about this, so I'm going to pull up setting priorities, and there's 2 ways, right? So there's like with Cardigan and work, and then personal priorities. So I'll speak for myself. And what I will say is, for me, I always want work to be the least interesting part of me, right? I want it to be the least interesting part of about me and who I am as a person. So I did prioritize that. Now, I'm not going to say that was the case when I was 16 to 22 years old, right? Because I had all these goals, right? I wanted to have a certain job by a certain period of time. I wanted to make this amount of money. I wanted to have this title, and again, that's the chase. That's the chase that we all kind of end up at. But I think it's kind of a natural thing. And so when I think about this, what I tell people, I like to quote old school Kanye West. So I'm gonna preface that with old school, right? Nothing in the last 5 years. But there's this song, The Good Life, from Kanye, and he says, having money is not everything, but not having it is, right? But then at the same time, he says, I'm gonna go on a living spree because they say the best things in life are free, right? And so in my head, I try to like put those two things together. Because if you think about it, and those of us who are in college, you kind of have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? And so there's this little triangle, and at the bottom, it talks about physiological needs. So food, water. Then to move up, you start thinking about safety. And then you move up, and then it's like love and esteem, right? And you kind of keep moving up to like self-actualizing. So until you've kind of taken care of, I have food and water, I can put food on the table. Then once you've gotten there, then you're like, okay, well now I want to be recognized and all of this for my job. Now I want esteem. And then once you've taken care of all of these things, you can kind of try to do more for the community, the world, kind of be your best self. So I don't want to tell people they shouldn't go after the job, because I think all the work you do early on will pay off down the road. What I would say is try to have a healthy balance of it. Because I think even with my Chase the Good story, I realized, I moved up quickly. I worked really hard. I had a PhD by the time I was 30, I think, so it was kind of one of those things, but there were blinders on. And there's probably a lot of things that I didn't experience, a lot of memories I didn't make, a lot of like joy I didn't necessarily have, that I could have those years had I done a better job of balancing out the having money isn't everything, but not having it is, and going on my living spree, if you will. And so, once I started focusing on chasing the good, that was kind of my living spree sort of phase, if you will. So I would say, the foundation of professional success, however you choose to define that, does free you up to do the things you really want to do down the road.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I don't know if that was a good answer, because I feel like that's so different for every person. And I've been the person who chased all those things up front. And because I did that, affords me opportunities later in life, But if I could have put a little bit more of the living spree in the first, 30 years of my life, that probably would have been great. So I hope a Kanye quote wasn't out of order, but
I don't think they'll cancel you for it.
Okay.
Right.
Old school Kanye.
All right, so we have our first question, and they said, Dr. Hardaway, what do you think sets you apart as you move forward in your career, and what has led you to your success?
Yeah, and you can just call me Harold. The marketing firm we use to help us said I need to put that in my bio and stuff, because, well, to be honest, right, being a Black person, also looking younger than I am, when you walk into a room with different people, saying doctor automatically shifts the way people think and feel about you. In this conversation, that's not necessary. So thank you for that. Sets me apart, and again, I will say this thing, like the intersection of these two things. So I always kind of say, I actually really am really excited about solving problems and kind of making beep happen, right? Like that gets me going. So if someone has a really big problem they haven't been able to figure out, like synthesizing and processing information, and then being able to translate that into digestible chunks for people, is what people have always come to me for, right? So, and to kind of give you guys a bit of my background, I started out doing loss mitigation, and then they needed someone to come up with training for the department because it was growing. So I was like, hey, I'm willing to give it a shot. So this is kind of the being useful, stepping into the unknown space. I knew how to do the job, never necessarily written training materials, right? And then from there, I ended up working with a team who was sort of building software, et cetera, because I was going to have to train on it, but then kind of getting in the tech space a little bit in terms of business process and also requirements, et cetera. I got a job at HEB I wasn't qualified for. By the way, any job I've ever had, I never felt I was qualified for. So let me just throw that out there to everybody. Go ahead and apply. And, you know, I was doing change management, but then I also was like, oh, I think there's this need for communication over here. So I was ghostwriting for leaders. HR was my client. And from an IT perspective, HR was my client. And then, you know, specifically communications. And they were like, hey, you seem to have a knack for this. You want to be the manager of communications? And I was like, sure, right? But a lot of it was just trying to be useful, listening, learning, translating what someone was asking for between two parties, right? So IT and the business, if you will, being that translator, putting in digestible chunks, helping people move it forward. And I also think being really flexible, listening. I probably didn't do it too, I'm talking a lot now, but honestly, listening is really important, right? And what people are asking for and solving that problem. So even like I said before, companies come to us because maybe they know what they want, but they don't know how to get there. And translating and being able to sort of bring that vision to life for people, I think has made me successful. Obviously, and I probably work too much too, but my brain is always going. I'm always wondering what's next. I'm generally curious. And I am okay with being wrong about something. And what I mean about that is, even when it comes to our business, we will go talk to people and we're like, hey, we don't know what we're doing. We need help. So saying when you need help is important. Inviting people in, you know, is important as well. So I think a lot of those things have kind of, you know, led to the success of where I am now, and not being afraid to fail. Because, and again, not being wrong. And the researcher in me would tell you, if you try something and it doesn't work, you have learned something. It doesn't work. And that, you know, you probably shouldn't do that again. So my friend Jesse, who this is one person I call on a regular basis, he saves me from things trying to be perfect by telling me just to tell myself I'm prototyping something. He goes, it's a prototype. It's a prototype. Just test it, get it out there, and see what people say. Because a lot of times, even in a creative space, right? Whether you're writing, whether it's a video, whether, you know, it's graphic design, you want it to be perfect. But sometimes just do it, get it out there, be open to the criticism, listen, change and pivot quickly. That was a very long answer, but.
No, it was perfect. Thank you. I mean, okay, so you made a quick comment in there and you just like, you never felt qualified. And I just want to know, how do you deal with imposter syndrome going into the industry?
Yeah, you know, we're all going to have that, I think. And the funny thing is, everyone does. So this is a real talk conversation, right? So what I honestly just kind of tell myself is, what would a white man do, right? Like, and I don't mean that as a dig towards white men. I mean, if you think about our country, that individual has the most privilege, right? And so if I walk into a space thinking, oh, I'm gay and Black, what do people expect of me, expect from me? And I act that way, that's how people are going to treat me, because people treat you how you teach them to treat you, right? But if I walk into a room like, you know, I'm going to be a nice person, right? I'm going to be myself, but I own the room. I'm here because I deserve to be here. I'm here because people want to hear my opinion. Then people will treat you that way. And I think an interesting kind of, you know, there are individuals that I coach, and, you know, I was speaking to, and this wasn't someone I was coaching, but just even through stakeholder interviews and coaching people, you know, if sometimes when people look at resumes, specifically, I will say women that I've coached have said this, I felt good about this job because I could do 100% of the things that are listed on it. So I feel okay applying, right? So, but if you were to ask a man, regardless of race, if they could do 30% or 50% of it, they're still going to apply for the job, right? You know what I mean? So thinking about, like, what would the person who has the most privilege do? How would they think about this, right? And one thing I think is really important that someone told me. They were like, people are going to doubt you. Someone is doing that for you. You don't need to do it yourself. That's a full-time job that people in the world are probably happy to do for you. So let them do that, and then you sort of march ahead. And again, think about, if you got invited, it's for a reason, right? That's why people want you there. And it's not that, I tell people all the time, like, I've had panic attacks before. I say this because people don't talk about things like that. But even before I go into presentations or meetings, sometimes I'll have to like sit in the car and be like, all right, who are you going to be today? I talk myself up, I'm ready to go. And then I walk out. I think one of the interesting things is when I was really young, my mother told me, Harold, if anyone ever says anything bad about you, it's probably just because they're jealous. Do I think that's 100% true? No. Am I always a great, nice person? No. And some of those things I probably deserved. But being sort of a young gay Black kid, it's sort of in my head. Anytime anything bad happened, I always interpret it as, oh, they're just jealous. And I kind of like moved on. And interestingly enough, another leader at a different company told a story about like people would stare at her and kind of whisper things or whatever. And her mother would always say, oh, they're just talking about how beautiful you are. She was a Black leader in this organization, right? And so sometimes I think our parents really do a lot to help us and prepare us for the world. But general imposter syndrome, you deserve it, right? People will treat you how you show up. And so just show up like you deserve to be there. And even if you don't necessarily believe it, fake it till you make it, and think, what would the person with the most privilege say? What would they do? And do that. Because if you show up and you already think you're an imposter, then you're going to get a no, right? But if you show up differently and you still get a no, well, at least you tried. So I am well aware of, the lack of privilege that I have for all these other reasons, but I refuse to show up that way, because I think then you show up defeated.
Yeah, okay, you went off on that one. I was up. Look, I didn't even know.
Yeah, and again, that's not necessarily a dig. It's just like, who's the most privileged person, right? And then if you think, how would they respond in this situation? Do that.
Right.
Give it a shot. It's you're prototyping. How about that? We're going to prototype this particular behavior and see if it changes your outcomes.
Dang, that's one for a Twitter post. If it go famous, I won't give you credit. No, I'm just So Karen said, what tactics do you use to motivate team members or others that aren't as enthusiastic?
Yeah, it's about, what do you love doing? Right? And I think you have to meet people where they are, not where you want them to be. And a lot of times, for motivation of people, it's about working on stuff. So this is what I would say. On our team, we have a small team. And even when I had a larger team, sometimes giving away a little bit of the power, or I would say even like sharing it. If it's a team meeting, it's like giving someone an opportunity to either share their knowledge with the team or to lead a particular area. Sometimes the people who are introverted will tell you, they don't necessarily want the recognition. They don't want to be upfront. But the extroverted people, might be like, yes. There was one person, here we go. This is an answer. Ask them what they want. Ask them what motivates them. And I'll give you a funny story about how when I was over recognition for another company, we had all these programs. And it was working out really well in some of our divisions, but at the corporate office, it was working out really poorly. And we had orchestrated something, we spent a lot of money on it, et cetera. And then I was like, why don't we just pull focus groups together and ask people? And they were like, can we just get, ice cream cups, the ice cream truck, this is HEB. So bring out the HEB ice cream truck to give out these little bitty cups. And I was like, really? I was like, okay. So then we picked a day, we invited everyone on the corporate office to come out. The ice cream truck was there. We had the media team set up a speaker with music, and there were like 400 or 500 people that came out within an hour period. It was all over Twitter. It was all over Instagram about how HEB was the best place to work. And then I asked my event coordinator, I was like, all right, how much did this cost me? And then she was like, oh, it was like 75 or $100. And I'm like, what? We were prepared to spend so much money. But when you actually meet people, listen to them, ask them what they want, typically what you will find out as a leader is it is easier and cheaper and simpler than anything you would have dreamed up, right? So what I've learned is just ask people, what do you want? What motivates you? What do you want to work on? Sometimes the organization tends to drive the projects that, we worked on, no matter where I've worked. But then I'm like, hey, give teams budgets to do a passion project, or an individual to have a passion project as well. But in terms of motivating individuals, what is it that they want? And being okay if they don't show happiness and joy and excitement the same way that I do, or the same way that you do, right? So that's that part about being inclusive. Yeah, some people may just want to go do their own thing in a corner, but they're really good at it. So seeing and appreciating the value that someone, provides. But Karen, to answer your question, I just ask them, like, what's going to get you going, and then I try to do that versus guessing.
Period. Mm-hmm. Okay, and then for students going into the creative field, a lot of times people don't have support from their parents, or they're like, oh, like this job will pay you nothing. Like you need to be like an engineer or a doctor or something, and how do people handle the lack of support from home to keep pushing through?
Ooh, that's a tough one. Right. So what I would say is, that is probably, being firm and being clear about, is this something that's going to matter to you on your deathbed? Sometimes I feel like and remaining firm, right? And kind of, what are you willing to sacrifice to push forward? So I think, from a parent situation, sometimes our parents know what they know. And if you're from an underrepresented group, a lot of times it's been about being a doctor or a lawyer, right? Or getting into a company and getting a good job. Because that's what they know, and the world unfortunately hasn't changed a whole lot, but our kids now are growing up with different experiences and wanting to branch out, and parents may not necessarily see other things, as careers, or they, challenge you. But if it's something that you want, I say stick with it and try to invite your parents into the conversation, or if you can find mentors or other people who have been, really successful, and point your parents in kind of that direction and talk about, a career. Unfortunately, I didn't necessarily have the situation. I actually have a funnier story where I probably didn't push back and fight so hard. So I'll be real honest and love my mother to death, but this is a funny story. I got into Baylor on to be a teacher. So music education. So they drove me up for all of my auditions. They paid for my private lesson teachers, all that kind of stuff. And then the day I'm registering across the table, they're like, so, if you do this, it's not going to afford you the standard of living that you're used to. Are you sure that you want to do it? And I was like, I guess not. And literally I'm like registering at that moment. And so I went into business school. I can't say that that's a bad thing. But I kind of found my way back to even, a more creative space. But I would say, had it really mattered to me, I think I would have stood up for what I wanted at that moment. So I would tell folks, to be strong, surround yourself with other people who do support you. And because I think a lot of times, even students really focus on trying to like push the mountain up the hill. And I'm always like, stack the deck in your favor. Like from an organization standpoint, we work with people who do what we want, who want to work with us and are doing the work that excites us. And so I would say just continuing to build, your support structure, inviting your family members in where you can would be really important. I haven't had to deal with that too much personally, so I feel like I can't give the best answer to you, but I'll ask some other friends, and if they have anything to offer, I will email you and you can share it with the group.
But that ain't no problem. And then just the last question, since we've reached to, I just want to ask you, what are your plans for the future, whether it's professionally or personally, or if you had anything you wanted, to advertise or say about?
Ooh, plans for the future.
Mm-hmm.
Did I jot anything down for this one? I don't even think I did.
Oh.
To get out of my house, maybe to take a trip or, a vacation soon. I think a lot of organizations, especially people in creative spaces, have been hit really hard, with COVID. So we have been professionally figuring out how we pivot. We've been fortunate enough that with the work that we do, we still have a lot of our clients. Personally it's vacation. I need to go on vacation somewhere, even if it is just getting, just to get outside of these four walls. Professionally, speaking has always been something I probably really wanted to do. It's kind of an opportunity for me to get on stage, so I've done a little bit of like musical theater back in the day, and getting even back into Cardigan and the work we're doing is kind of the creative space, but kind of being on stage and exploring that a little bit more and really figuring out how to chase the good to the next level, and to reach more people. Because a lot of folks honestly really respond to it. And I was like, it's just kind of something I was saying for myself, but it might be something that's for other people as well. So, in the next few years, that's kind of it, right? Traveling, continue to explore, chasing the good, find other opportunities to help folks out, especially these days. And I'm kind of, you reach that point in your life where you can stop worrying about yourself. And I think that first few parts of the pyramid, right? Food, shelter, loving and belonging, it's kind of like I'm worried about myself. And then once you get past a certain point, you can worry about others. So I have, kind of expanded with participating and helping out the communities, whatever those communities might be in terms of board service, whatnot. So just kind of figuring out what's next from that perspective. So being okay with whatever comes. So one of my best coaches always said, there's no way things should be. And I think in my life, I sort of respond and react to the moment. And that has served me well, versus thinking that there's a certain way things should be.
Right. All right. And then if there is any, do you have any last advice for students or people that you did get to hit on during the talk?
No, I think for me, it's like, chase your dreams, right? But at the same time, just make sure you're living life and enjoying it along the way. So, to me, that's the biggest thing. And no is like the most powerful word you have in your language. So like say no. And by setting boundaries and saying no, if you really don't want to do something, it creates and opens up so much space for you to do the things that you want to do. And here we go. I will give everyone permission to prioritize themselves. How about that? Because a lot of times we as people are wired not to disappoint others, but we will easily disappoint ourselves, right? And so we are wired, I think, like I said, to put others first. So spend a little bit of time on yourself. So I give everyone permission to prioritize themselves. That's my last thing.
Thank you so much. It was a really good talk. I really appreciate all the gems. I was taking notes while you was talking and listening to you talk. So I really appreciate it. It was really good. So thank you for coming here today. And if you all in the audience want to hear more talks like this, and receive really good nuggets of advice from professionals in the industry, we have these talks every Thursday at 1 p.m. So feel free to pull up at any time after 1. Well, not like long after 1, but it'll still be up on the Facebook after 1. So yeah, this is a really good talk, and thank you guys so much. And I'll see you guys next week on Thursday. So have a good day.
Thanks for having me. Shout out to Karen.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.